All right. Let's see. I think I'm in the studio for now. And you got that, Willie? Can you kind of fix that right now?
Yeah, I'm trying to get us up there.
Yeah. We can get that. Yeah, there's something there. Yeah, we're live. So, until that is fixed, welcome to Texas A&M Aggies Live, part of the Voice of College Football Network. I'm your host, Cameron Honesty. I'm joined by Robert Behrens and Will Stone, both writers. Obviously, Robert is managing editor of Go Ball Hunting with SB Nation. Will Stone is a contributor. Obviously, my former permanent co-host, now just a great voice that comes on the show every once in a while. And while we get this fixed, mainly we're going to start out talking about the state of Texas A&M athletics. And one of the main reasons we're doing that is the time of the season we're in, going into the spring sports schedule. It's starting to wind down. When baseball and softball take over, basically you have a situation where you're trying to pay attention as much as possible to both. Baseball comes number one for most Aggie fans. We saw a team that started out very poorly to start the season, obviously losing, I think it was 3 SEC series in a row. They got back on track, winning series against Tennessee, Arkansas, LSU, South Carolina in between that, which, included one of the greatest comebacks in the program's history. And ever since, it's been, one of those seasons where you just thought, yeah, this team's going to make it back to the postseason. And you're going to have, another maybe miraculous run because of what they have at pitching in their starting pitching staff, what they have at the plate with all the talent, starting from, Jace Levelette to Caden Sorrell to Wyatt Hensler, to obviously two guys who are active leaders in home runs in college baseball. And we talked about it on the show a couple weeks ago, things really took a drastic turn. There we go. and losing to the worst team in college baseball, I would say probably the worst team in college baseball outside of a couple, obviously the worst team in SEC history in Missouri, who after beating Texas A&M, sweeping Texas A&M in Blue Ball Park, I do remember, obviously I do not travel for those all those games. It's just something I don't do for my other job. So I was actually watching on TV. I actually went to the gym on the Friday. They were up, I think it was 6-5-0 in game one. I came back thinking, okay, this game's over. And then that slow unravel, I remember watching it, and I was talking to one of my writers at Aggies Wire, and I was like, do you really think this is the start of something horrible? I was kind of joking. And it was. It was literally the start of something horrific that we had not seen really since the beginning of the season. And mainly when we saw A&M get swept, it was just because this team had not found the things that were working for them. They really hadn't developed any chemistry together. They really just didn't understand what they had to do to get these type of wins. But after beating LSU 2 out of 3 games, winning that series at home, Caden Sorrell hitting basically a walk-off home run, I think he hit in the 8th or something on the final Sunday to win that series. You thought it's going to be a cakewalk, right? Because Missouri had one of the worst pitching staffs coming in. The ERAs were like 10 for all these guys, basically. I'm trying to think if their day 2 starter, he's the backup quarterback, I believe, for the Tigers. And he literally made A&M's batting lineup look like a joke. And I can't even talk about this with a straight face sometimes because it's so confusing. Because you go into the week and you think this team might be done now because everybody from Kendall Rogers to all these other college baseball experts have basically said A&M just had to beat Missouri. They had to just sweep that team and they'd probably be in the NCAA tournament. You go into this week, that last week, knowing that you have Georgia on the road to finish the SEC regular season. And you basically had to sweep them to have any chance. You'd have to go into the SEC tournament, which began today, and win a couple games at least, and then you maybe have a chance. Well, that team, again, they don't have a midweek game. They go to Friday. Justin Lampkin, who deserves a ton of credit for, obviously he's going to make a lot of money now with that performance.
He pitched great. I mean, was it 15 strikeouts?
Yeah.
Just completely dominant stuff.
Exactly. And it was great to see because I thought maybe this, but again, one of the reasons that I didn't think this was like a turnaround for them was because of the offense. I mean, they could only muster any runs off of home runs. That's been the situation all season. This team cannot hit consistently. So they have to rely on the long ball to get it done. And so when I saw that, I'm like, okay, well, it's a great win for Lampkin. It's a complete game, career night for him. Again, dude might get drafted higher than we all expected. But then you go into Saturday, and it's just much of the same for A&M. They end up losing those last two games. They are hanging on for dear life with any postseason hopes, and it's really probably going to rely on winning the SC tournament. They play, again, the irony of it all, they play the hottest team in the SC right now, Mississippi State, tonight at 8 p.m. And, it's hard to give them a chance in that game. I can't really say that because it's the SC tournament. I see these teams just kind of randomly play well all the time. But what do you guys thought on how this season's kind of derailed? And we're going to get to it at the end, but do you think this basically puts head coach Michael Earley's, career in Aggie land to an end?
I mean, I think that's got to be on the table because, look, when we started 1-9 in conference play, there were folks shouting from the rooftops that they thought it was a done deal that he was going to be gone. And then, of course, the team did go on that run you talked about where they beat a bunch of teams that really we didn't expect them to. And everyone kind of thought that, okay, now we finally righted the ship. They've figured some things out. They've come together, whatever it was. And yeah, it's just, kind of the icing on the cake of an exceptionally frustrating season because ultimately, after all that work that they did to actually make some hay in the middle of their conference slate, like you said, all they had to do was do what literally every other team did, and that was sweep Missouri. And I just really unfathomable not only just to drop a game because if you had just dropped a game to Missouri, people still would have talked about it in a negative light because it would have been their only win on the year. So to actually get swept by that team, to be honest, was an embarrassment for that A&M baseball team. And I hate to throw stuff out like that because it sounds overly dramatic, but I think that's what it was. And when you compound all of that with all of the struggles over the entire year after coming into the year as the consensus #1 team in the country, and now staring in the face of, like you said, barring a deep SEC tournament run, maybe even having to win the SEC tournament to make the postseason. If you go from being the preseason #1 to missing the tournament, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we'd be the first team to ever do that.
Yeah, it'd be the first time, I think, in baseball history, because you got to kind of look back at some of the former #1s, equally talented A&M, equally veteran-laden, obviously from starting pitching to you've got big hitters, you got contact guys, you got everything, right? You got everything in that lineup. So that's the thing. That's why it's just so insane to think that, and we can talk about, obviously, I'm going to get Will's take after this, but we can talk about just putting all the blame on Mike Earley. But there's something else too. You got to look at the assistants, you got coaches, you got to look at the hitting coach Caleb Longley, who was kind of a random hire in my opinion. It was I remember when it happened, I really didn't know anything about him, to be honest. And I keep track of these coaches for the most part, and I thought that was a very wild card, risky thing to do for a team that, in my humble opinion, you get a hitting coach that's really worth a damn and somebody who's been around the block and has had a lot of success, maybe just hasn't become a head coach for various reasons, we would not be talking about the situation right now. I almost guarantee that. I almost guarantee that if you had better hitting for this team this season, they'd be safely in the NCAA tournament by this time tonight.
I'll say one thing. This university loves doing things that have never been done, and not in a good way. I'll leave it at that. So I wanted to make sure I had the right numbers on this before I said this. So Missouri came into that series against A&M at Olsen Field, on A&M's home field. and swept us after being 0-24 or whatever they were, 0 a billion. Sweep us, and then they go play. They host Mississippi State, who A&M will play possibly tomorrow. I think there's some weather things that are happening right now that may postpone it.
Mm-hmm.
Here are those scores for you. And Mississippi State won all these games, by the way. 25-7, 13-3, 12-1.
Yikes.
Were those last two were run rolls. So it's the most, you know. I know I do this on every episode, but it's like for a football analogy, it's like mashing together the 2021 2022 seasons where you have because they did some it's not like we went out and beat a bunch of bad teams to get our SEC wins. Like we took a series from Tennessee, who's in the top 10 or was number 1 at the time, Arkansas, who's top 5, LSU I think is number 1 right now. You won series against all of those teams, but you couldn't win a series against Kentucky. You got swept by the lowest team, completely dreadful team in the conference in Missouri. And, to go back to football, I think that the Missouri thing to me is the App State. It's a perfect comparison in my opinion, because it may even be worse than that, to be quite honest, because Missouri is just not a competitive, serious SEC baseball program. I get they beat us. I don't care. That's still a fact.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the worst part of it, because I would say this about App State. I love, if we had like a Longhorn on here, that's all he'd talk about, and he'd be laughing with his little hat on and stuff. And I mean, I get that. That's the butt of every joke. That was actually my first year. God, I can't even think back to that. That was my first year covering the team, actually. That was like my third or second game or whatever. So yeah, I remember that day pretty well. But at least I think App State was at least competitive. I would say they're a competitive program.
Yeah.
Missouri seemingly doesn't really care, at all. I think that university, I remember I saw an article, I followed a Missouri beat writer, and it was just like, basically the chancellor and everybody, maybe we should pay attention to baseball. Maybe now we should. Maybe we should, because I don't even know what the funds they put into it. It's not a program they really care about at all.
There's probably a bigger talent gap between A&M baseball and Missouri baseball than A&M football and App State football, if we're being honest.
Yes. Exactly.
But to bring that all together, 2021, you lost some embarrassing games as well, but then you beat Alabama, who was number 1 and this awesome team. And it makes no sense why this season played out the way it did. I mean, if they had beaten the Kentuckys and Missouris of the world, but lost to Arkansas and Tennessee, I would understand that. That makes sense to me. But this was just the most mind-boggling season results that no one could have predicted this at any point. Early on, you would say, oh, we're not going to start 1-9 in conference play. And then after that, you wouldn't say, oh, we're going to beat Tennessee, in Arkansas and LSU. And then, it's this huge roller coaster. And unfortunately, I think the roller coaster is at the end of the season is on a very, very low point.
Yeah. And I think this is what we're going to obviously get to next, is that, you look at, so I kind of have it actually here. So Michael Earley's contract, and you talk about baseball, Mississippi State's ex-head coach that was recently fired. One of the reasons why that happened was obviously Mississippi State was kind of going downhill. This was a team that had won the national championship, I believe, 2019, 2018. It was very recently. And one of the reasons he was fired was he was getting paid, I believe, $1.5 million. And that's a lot for a college baseball coach. I remember the days in the early 2000s when these guys were getting paid like $200,000 a year, which is still a lot of money. But in college athletics, it's that's the lowest, besides softball coaches and golf coaches and stuff like that. And, when you're Mississippi State, you have a lot of resources in football. You have a lot of resources in basketball, obviously very competitive. Well, football's not that competitive, but they're still a big time SEC program. Basketball obviously is very competitive, so they're going to pay very nicely there. So when they look at the baseball program, they're going, why are we paying this guy $1.5 million? He's not producing. Let's move on. For Texas A&M, Michael Earley's contract, I believe it was a 4-year. I think his base is about $900,000, increases to $950 in year 2, $1 million in year 3, and $1.05 million in year 4. So from a financial standpoint, he's getting paid pretty well for a guy who wasn't a paid assistant until his second year, I believe, with Texas A&M at that point. So again, it was a big gamble to hire him in the first place. We all remember back then of, the whole thing of the players going on social media. We want Early. He's our choice. We'll come back if he comes. And I always thought that was very weird. And from an outside point of view, I was like, okay, I get it. You want to keep the talent, but they're dictating everything. It goes back to the Mark Stoops thing where like the fan base kind of thinks they have a lot of power now because they bullied them into hiring Mike Elko, where I wasn't behind the scenes. Maybe that was the case when that happened. I think it had a part to do with it because I think Ross Bjork kind of, for a better terms, crapped his pants and thought, I shouldn't make a bad decision here because it seems like a big voice in the Texas A&M fan base despises this when Billy Liucci leaked it. So, I mean, I'm not saying that they have this power now with Michael Earley. I just think it's one of those situations where you really have to weigh the pros and the cons here of, is this just a coach that's going through the ups and downs of his first season? Or is this just a gamble that didn't pay off because he just doesn't really know what he's doing? You need to bring in a more veteran voice, someone who's been around the block, who's been coaching for 20 plus years and just knows how to, utilize talent, because maybe that's an issue, right? There's too much talent on this roster. And we can talk about Jace Lavalette because he's had one of the worst stretches over the past 2 weeks. I don't think he's gotten a hit in the last 5 games or something. He's a strikeout machine. He just does not look like himself. And I think the best player on the team right now is Caden Sorrell. And outside of being a game time decision, which was very surprising because I saw him have a cast on his hand, which one of the fans of the game actually had a great image of that. You thought he was out for the season, but apparently maybe precautionary, who knows? We'll find out. But he looks like the best player on this team. He looks like the most talented guy. He's produced like it. Guys like Terrence Keel have kind of dropped off a little bit. Granted, he's a freshman. And Wyatt Hensler has been good, but not great like we thought he'd be. So again, you can judge a head coach and based on what he's getting out of the talent on that roster. And at the same time, though, I don't know if I'm going to put all the blame on him. And I believe I said this earlier, is that Caleb Longley, I think, is the biggest issue. I think if you are going to take the gamble in year 2 with Early, you have to change that staff up. Maybe look at Jason Kelly, their pitching coach, a little closer and see if he's really somebody you want to keep on staff who's really going to help develop these younger pitchers coming up. There's a lot that they can think about. I just think that because of the way, and we don't have to spend a lot of time, softball lost the other night, just in the classic Aggie fashion of losing to a team that they're not supposed to beat them, and they're not a laughing stock, and it's the way they lost, and they were the number 1 overall seed for the first time, and A&M is scared of number 1. All those narratives, I think it's feeding into a lot of the fan base. They just want change, right? They just want them to make a change. They want Trev Alberts to just either fire him and move on, but at the same time, I keep hearing from people who are deeper in the college baseball business have said that, look, you could fire Early and that's fine, but what candidate do you have lined up? Because a lot of these guys, after Schlossnigle left, did get locked up with their teams. And granted, Alabama's coach, I'm blanking on his name.
Vaughn.
Right. Yes. Rob Vaughn. Thank you. Who does have ties to A&M. Yes, that's an option I've seen. The fan base really loves him. Obviously, he's a young, up-and-coming guy, has done very well with Alabama. Alabama's not known as a baseball school, and he's really turned them into one. And I guess you'd have to back up the Brinks truck, and you'd have to pay him a ton of money, and you're still paying Jimbo Fisher. We did an article about that, the allocation the other day, the spending for severance, which was like $25 million. So it's like, do they have the funds? I don't know. There's all these questions I'm not going to get answers to, but and I've been talking about this for a week now, and it's actually tiring, but yeah, I think they just have to be very careful with this decision, because I know that it seems very early or very easy to just fire Early and move on and try to find somebody else, but it could be detrimental to your roster and your future.
Yeah, I think it's going to say a lot about Trev, who I've defended like time and time again, and I still will until we see how this plays out. But I think with the way things started, he should have been making calls back in like March and like just like putting out feelers saying, hey, like, what's he interested in this job? Like, who out there put at least a preliminary list of candidates together who you could potentially target if you do make a change. It's something I hate talking about, but I mean, it's just part of life. People in this sport, either you're awesome and you get extensions and you get paid well, or you get fired and you get paid well. So either way, it works out pretty well for him. So I'm not going to feel too bad. But
what a life.
Yeah, I know it's very unfortunate.
Nice.
Yeah. I won't say too much. I think if it were me, I would probably look to make a change. I just, and people will say like, oh, the roster, we just, like all that kind of stuff. I'm like, the buyouts, like compared to how much we care about this sport, how much the fan base cares about baseball, the buyout is peanuts. It really is. It's not going to make a dent in anything else that we're trying to do right now. So if that means you lose, I'm not going to name any names because I don't know what that situation is like. Honestly, I don't care who you lose. Like it is a blow up the whole thing, nuke the whole thing, start from scratch, get someone in here who can fix it, can rebuild it. I think people say this. I tend to agree. A&M should be a top 5 job in baseball. There's no doubt about it. Top 3, most likely, if we're being honest. So there's no reason why you can't go out and hire someone who can, especially in today's game, who can flip it around very quickly. I mean, other coaches have done that at places not far from our school, which we hate to see. But
what are you talking about, Will?
Yeah. But yeah, that's kind of my take on it.
I tend to agree, and look, I'm generally not the one who's all about like the emotional firings or feeling like that you have to make a move just because things didn't go the way you wanted them to. And especially, I think on paper when you say that you've got a first-year head coach, normally that like all but eliminates the idea of getting rid of a guy just because it seems insane to have that short of a leash. But I do feel like this was a unique circumstance, referencing a lot of the stuff y'all have already talked about, that a big part of the early hire was the continuity of keeping this roster together because it had the potential to be the most talented roster in baseball. And we thought that you keep these guys together and they've got a shot at winning a national championship. And so you kind of went into this saying there's a chance that even if everything goes great in year one, that year one is kind of the peak. And then from there, we don't know what Michael Earley really is as far as, culture building, roster building, long-term, how he builds his program and what that's going to look like. But we thought that because you're keeping a guy from the previous staff that you could kind of keep the wheels in motion of what was already obviously working very, very well under Schloss. So having all that said, for things to go this badly in year one, I feel like it's a really tough sell to bring him back because what's the hope for the future? Because are you going to have a roster that's more talented than this? It seems unlikely. Now, Cameron, you referenced maybe you can make a hitting coach change or change up some things and that makes a difference. But it's a hard sell, especially from the fan perspective. I think if you bring him back, there's going to be a lot of folks that are going to be in full on wait and see mode, if not full on pessimistic mode. I think about this program if he comes back, and that's a sucky place to be. And that's not to say that he's incapable of turning it around. Certainly crazier things have happened, but I'm kind of with Will that if it were up to me, which it's not.
I mean, hey, if you yell loud enough and tweet loud enough, maybe you'll have
Hey, like you said, we did it with Mark Stoops, right? Like
yeah,
just yell really loud on
former Texas A&M coach Mark Stoops.
I think we have more pull than we might give ourselves credit for.
No, that's why I said it. Like that's the thing. I'm partially joking, but at the same time, I remember that night, and I remember I was getting all this intel. I was talking directly to people, and I was like, okay, what the hell is going on here? Because I'm getting one guy telling me that's a done deal. Another guy going, wait, hold on a minute. And I'm like, wait. And then I see all these tweets, and I'm not gonna even name some of them, but it was pretty vicious from like bigger profile, not just like the trolls, right? And I was like, okay, they may have a big part in this because all of a sudden things just turned the other day, and I think Elko got hired like 3 days later, or maybe
I think it was like 3 hours later. It was like the next day. Like,
it was not. Yeah, it was pretty
before
quick.
lunchtime. Yeah.
No, I agree with both of you guys because I was just kind of setting the question. My opinion on this keeps changing because I am of that ilk of give a guy at least a little more time. But I have seen this fan base really sour outside of the really. I mean, you don't call them 2%ers. There are a lot of those who are just I'll give an example. Like my dad, who is an 82 graduate, he'll pay attention. He loves Aggie sports, but he'll say, look, he'll ask me questions all the time. What's going on here? What's going on here? He'll watch the games, but at the same time, he's retired and 65, and he's not going to pay attention to every detail that's going on. But then there's others who will pay attention to every minute detail that's going on. And those who go to every game and buy season tickets and are really into what A&M baseball represents. If they're the ones souring on this program, that is a bad deal for the future. And you don't want to invest in a guy who they really don't have any hope with in terms of building. And there's the favoritism with the roster now is what it is. Like if you like your players, like I personally, from a baseball perspective, I love Weston Moss. I love that kid. I think he's a dynamite pitcher. I think he's going to be a future star. I think he's already shown that ability. But again, I wouldn't like destroy a program's future just because I like a handful of players and I don't want them to leave. It just doesn't make any sense. And it goes back to, we're always going to go back to football on this podcast because it is a football show. And you go back to the 22 historic recruiting class. There were players in that class that you thought, okay, they'd be perfect fits here. But at the same time, is it worth gambling your entire future over because they're super talented or they're not fits? And we have found out in the Mike Elko era that talent is awesome and you need it to succeed in the SEC and win a championship in college football, but you also need to be a fit and you need to fit what that program is asking you to do, whether it's scheme or culture or whatever. And if you don't have that, you really don't have anything. You're not going to be very successful. So I don't know everything that's going on. And, you watch every game this season and the problems are pretty in your face, right? You know that they can't hit consistently. You know that guys like Ryan Prager have not really lived up to what we thought he was going to be after he came back. He could have gone to the MLB after being drafted in the 3rd round. Just the parts that you thought were going to work. Jace Levelette's really number one outside of that stretch he had against Arkansas. They just haven't lived up to the part. They haven't to the number one preseason ranking. And if you're any type of baseball fan, you really just look at that. Even if you're not an A&M fan, you look at that from the outside point of view and go, that team was number one? Really? They got swept by Missouri. They have 28 wins on the year, and they basically have to win the SC tournament, the hardest tournament to win to get to the postseason. Like, what happened, right? And we can tell you, like, this, but at the same time, we just don't know if he can't handle this. Maybe Early just can't handle this level of a program. We'll find out pretty quickly, because if they lose to Mississippi State, the wheels are going to roll. We're either going to find out if he's going to come back or if they're going to make a change pretty quickly, is what I've heard on either front. But obviously we don't have any breaking information here. They still have to play a game. So
I think our friend String, I think he put it pretty simply. It's not really asking like, why should you fire him? It's why should you keep him? Like, why?
Yeah.
What has he shown? And not to dog on him, but like it's a genuine question. Like, what has he shown at this point with a full season of evidence, of data? What about that gives you confidence when, like Robert said, when you're not as talented? Like there's players on this team who are going to get drafted very highly. A couple for sure will not be here next year. Specifically, Jace Prager, probably Justin Lampkin, guys like that. So when you had that and you like riding off the momentum from last year and you just completely fall flat, like what sparks confidence about what you see? And maybe it's the like the road series wins are impressive. There's no doubt. Like Tennessee, Arkansas. That's impressive, but when you add it all up and look at the whole picture, I mean, there's just not a lot there on the whole that would make me feel very confident going forward.
Yeah, it's like any job, right? Because I'll just make this quick point. It's like any job, and you really have to look at what you've accomplished over the last year. I mean, you work for any manager or something, you go over the goals you had, what you accomplished, what you're doing, what you're looking to work on next quarter or whatever. We all know that from careers and stuff like that. So it's like, again, what does he really have to show? Struggle. Oh, he got those road wins. But guess what? I was looking at a stat the other day. Tennessee has 4 SEC series wins. So what does that tell you? Tennessee was the number 1 team. They've struggled. They're going to be in the tournament. But we've really seen the SEC, the top dogs, the guys who are going to, obviously Texas. Again, I don't know how good Texas is, but they did win the SEC. They're going to be a favorite going forward. And, we can go into that in private, but you look at Schlossnagle's situation where he brought Max Wiener, one of the rising coaches in all of college baseball, who should be a head coach sooner than later. I honestly thought that Mississippi State would throw every dollar they had at him, but he's been a huge part of any success they've had because they haven't been able to hit the ball very well, and they've still won a lot based on elite pitching, and that's going to get you forward. And we just talked about it, that your starting pitching was supposed to be the reason you won a lot of games. And outside of some great performances from Lampkin, Miles Patton being okay here and there in every third game of the series, Ryan Prager has not lived up to it at all. He's had some real stinkers, I would say, like throughout the season. He's had his moments, but really has not been A&M's best pitcher. And so if you don't have those core strengths, again, what do you go off of, right? What do you say? Well, we did this, but we didn't do this for this, and then we lost to Missouri. It's just not good for him, right? There's nothing really on his resume that screams, bring me back.
Well, see, I think you just stumbled upon the solution here. Is you just fire Michael Earley, hire Max Wiener as our head coach, and then you just bring Michael Earley back as your hitting coach, and you're paying your own offset.
All would be forgiven.
I mean, I'd be so in on that. I mean, God, I had the best month writing and talking about that. But I mean, I don't know.
I've got to go delete some tweets.
God, yeah, the entire.
But I do think though that from the baseball perspective, just looking at it as like the fan reaction, I think the one area where baseball is kind of getting the short end of the stick is that we gave them such a short leash because of the way this kind of whole athletics year has gone for A&M. Because you had football who started 7-1. We were all ecstatic after that LSU win, and then kind of crashed and burned down the stretch. You had basketball was in the top 10, was looking like one of the best teams in the country, and then gets knocked out by Texas in the SEC tournament and fails to make it out of the first weekend in March Madness again. So I think a lot of people, after everything that had gone wrong, were still like, but thank God for baseball. And they thought baseball was going to be the thing that redeemed it all and kind of, pulled us out of this malaise that seemingly the whole athletic department had been in.
Yeah.
And then it turned out to be maybe the most disappointing group out of any of them. In fact, that's probably not even a maybe.
Yeah.
And so I definitely think that the fan reaction is even more severe because of everything that led up to that.
And softball too, the way that ended.
Softball did not.
And that's the thing. No, we can talk about it a little bit, and we are actually going to dovetail into that. It's interesting though, because and I think I told you his pre-show, one of my writers, Jared Johnson, is a softball expert, and so his daughter, he goes to practice like 3 to 4 times a week, goes to all her games. She's on a California a team so they play all year long. She's most likely going to play in college, and so when that series was going on, he was telling me all about Dot, the Liberty head coach, and her background and stuff like that. I'm like, this might be challenging, but A&M's just so good in these areas, and they've got pitching depth, and they've got all that power to play with Maya Perez and Mac Barbara and KK DeMen. And it's like, but again, when they lost that first game, you got that feeling of, oh crap, they're not going to live up to those and we all know they beat the living hell out of Marist. I think they scored like 18 runs, and you thought, okay, maybe they're getting back to it. But then you go into Sunday night, up 2-0, I think up 3-1. And then I believe Liberty hit like a 3-run home run. They were up 6-3. A&M got a couple runs across and ended up losing 6-5. And you watch the end of that game, and it's just like Aggie Athletics just went, ooh, and it's like you're like in softball is the end of that. Watching that team, and I'm going to say, like, I believe in Trisha Ford. I think this is just 100%. A bad upset. I'm glad I saw some of the Aggie fans kind of get back to reality and go, okay, she's not the problem. Like, she's a great recruiter. She's got a lot of young talent going back. She's going to lose obviously a couple pieces, but at the same time, she's going to utilize the portal. And I could see them having like a Virginia type comeback, right? When Virginia lost to UCB, whatever that school was back in that NCAA tournament.
I had that same thought. That same,
yeah, exactly. And I can see that happening because they've just got too much talent. She is a great coach. She made a couple of mistakes with pitching, and I'm not going to get into that. It's softball. I'm not going to get too much into that because I'm not an expert. But no, that happens in the postseason. And I will say that Liberty, despite making the first super regional ever, is probably a team that's maybe going to knock some teams off. So it's not that A&M fans should feel good about that. It's just they got a bad draw. Like, I'll say Texas got it. Texas, who A&M beat 14-2 or something in the SEC tournament. They had an easier draw in their regional. They got out of it. Yeah, whoop-de-doo. They're the greatest athletic program ever. We get it. But at the same time, your regional matchups are big. It's in baseball too. You can get screwed, right? You can get a really hot team in there that ends up breaking the bracket and you're booted out, and they're on Southeast Louisiana State is off to the next round. You're kind of staring, what the hell just happened? That happens. But you look at, and going back to Early, in terms of A&M coaches right now, obviously you have Mike Elko, who's in proven mode. We're going to get to that at the end of the show. And, he did what he was supposed to do in the offseason with problems they had in the secondary and defensive issues that were all based on technicalities and having to fix coverage issues and eye discipline and stuff, bringing in Lyle Hemphill, who he trusted as his assistant. That was a move in the right direction. I had talked about that so much, and people, I think they get annoyed now. But at the same time, that's the type of thing you do to improve. If you just sit on your hands and go on to the next season going, well, let's hope, we improve. No, you got to do something in the offseason to get things rolling and make changes so that you can have success. But you look at the rest of the coaches at Texas A&M, guys like Jamie Morrison, the volleyball head coach. That's one of the dynamite head coaches, in this league. That's real. That I think A&M's future in volleyball is very bright, and I'm Ford and others. And so when you look at Early, it's like he's way on the bottom of the list. So I really do think moving on is just not going to have any cataclysmic results or ricochets or anything. And it's going to be an interesting decision. But again, if they went on some run and won the SEC tournament, I do not see that happening. I would not even bet money on that. I know our buddy John Patterson would probably bet money on that because he has.
I'm sure it's great odds.
He's been betting on A&M every time, and I think he won like $2,000 or something betting on Missouri. I'm like, oh God, it's like.
I think he had a tweet about if you had bet Missouri each game and kept rolling over the winnings, it would have been like an astronomical, huge amount.
He's like, I hate to do it, but I'm like, oh, man.
Yeah.
But no,
I'll say about softball, and kind of like to Robert's point, if they had done this in any other year of my life, I'd be like, oh man, that stinks. Instead, I'm just in a fiery rage. I'm just like, can we have one nice thing?
I had never
in pure embarrassment.
Even as a sports writer, I had not paid that much attention to softball in my life. I really hadn't, because we usually section things up. And I myself was so enthralled by it and so upset by it. I felt emotional from it. I was sitting in bed. I'm like, man, that affected me. I don't know why. Oh, I know why. It's just how it's all just crumbled down. And
I think the thing that shows you most how bad it's been is after that softball loss, I saw numerous Texas fans on X
sympathy.
Yes, they were like, I honestly feel bad. That's how bad this year has been.
And then you go to the comments like Aggie no ball, I hate them and all that. I saw one of those and I was just like, troll hatred, pure hatred. Okay, they're back. There's a couple that are like, I actually feel bad. I'm like, yeah, you're a part of a small percentage, but it's it is, yeah. It's that situation right now.
I mean, there's not a single sport that ended the year on a positive note. I mean, Like football, like complete collapse. Like even
it was the timing, right? Yeah, it was
like
the
even
timing. It was really
even the bowl game. Like the bowl game meant nothing, but it still makes me very mad that
it does, yeah. And no, yeah, and that's the way I was saying. Like Lyle Hemphill was hired because I think that bowl game.
yeah.
I'm not kidding you. It's like that was the change. I think after that game, Mike Elko basically said, "I can't have that happen anymore." Our secondary basically disappeared and allowed a terrible quarterback to just pass his way down the field. I remember watching that. I'm like, "Are they even playing coverage right now?" And he just made that change. But yeah, it's just been like that for the last 3 months. And so we're about to move on to football in a second. But now, I have seen less football talk for the first time in my career covering this team and really just covering A&M in general and following trends. This fan base talking about football. I mean, I saw a couple tweets here and there like, hey, we should be talking about football right now. It's like they didn't want any part of it because I think that, and granted, the way that the national coverage has been at Texas A&M has been very light because, Will, you and I actually talked, I think, in our first show about one of the reasons we believe that the coverage was so light is because of the Marcel Reed dynamic of his play against Texas, where some of the bigger names who don't watch every A&M game, they just watch the big ones, took what he did there, said, he's back quarterback. So, and he's going to start, and now we don't really care about A&M. And it's like, that's kind of where we're at. So that's what we're going to get into now. Do we think A&M A&M football can get this fan base back to a positive, outlook? And that's the thing, right? Because
I sure hope so.
Exactly. I've been ramping this up in coverage and stuff. I did my projections, which, man, the hate those got. I mean, that was fun. I had podcasts talking about it and stuff like that. I didn't even think they were going to talk about it. And it's mainly because I picked Texas to lose to Florida and A&M. And I had to talk about why I picked for 30 minutes, why I picked A&M to beat Texas. And most of it had to do with scheme. It had to do with player. It didn't have to do with hot takes, right? And then I predicted A&M to go 9-3 with, I believe, his losses to LSU, Florida, and Notre Dame. So I went a more realistic route. And again, I had to go through and talk to people why I picked that, because they're so soured on, the way the season started last year with the loss to Notre Dame, and then they got hot. You have 7-1, like Robert said. You finished 1-4, and you look pretty bad in a lot of those games outside of the Auburn game, where I think was actually Marcel Reed's best game. And he actually that game was one of the reasons why I'm high on him improving, because if he can do that with a very subpar wide receiver rotation, then I think he can do that with a much better one and a much faster one and a wide receiver corps that can actually separate in coverage. But yeah, I mean, that's really the question, is that, I think football is the only hope right now because of the changes that could be making with baseball and basketball. I mean, we're getting to that because there's stuff going on with Mackenzie Macombo, where he's at the NBA Combine. He's performing very well. He has until the 28th, so 8 days away, to make his decision if he wants to stay in or play for A&M next year. And if he's not on the team, then I think, A&M is going to be a very competitive team, but we don't know if they're going to make the NCAA tournament or not. If he is on the team, I think they have a pretty good shot at making the NCAA tournament. But again, you guys know, I know, football number 1, baseball number 2, basketball, and then everything else. So,
I will throw in there, I don't know if y'all saw, I think it was Joe Lenardi had his first way too early 26 projection.
He's funny.
Guess who the first team out was?
Pretty good. It's pretty good bit from him.
He had Chris McDermott. He had Chris McDermott, the hero of A&M basketball.
Yeah. Hey, I appreciate the dedication to finding our lone, current player. You could have a photo of them in A&M uniform. That's professional.
It's gonna be that guy.
No, but I feel like for football though, it is. I feel like it's the first time I can remember where, I feel like the national media may actually be higher on A&M than the fans are.
Yeah, because I sent that.
There's some of that.
Because I sent you the. It was Jake Wimberly, who he did his record predictions. I can get that up, Will. His were very interesting. Actually, Garner writing an article about it because, I really wanted the insight of why he picked these outside of Texas going 12-0, and then LSU going 10-2, and you've got so it's up there. You've got records there that the big surprise was like Alabama, Ole Miss, Florida makes perfect sense. South Carolina, I think that's kind of their floor, and then. Actually, he was on point with me. I think I picked Missouri to go 6-6. I've seen people think they're going to win 9 to 10 games, and then you get kind of the bottom feeders. But 10-2 is like you just said. There is national media out there, and he's not some fraud. He's not some guy who just does hot takes for a living. He's actually looking at the games and looking at the rosters and putting them together and going, okay, based on what each player has at star level, especially quarterback and defense. And O-line and, all the positions that matter the most for you to win in the SEC, he sees A&M going 10-2. And I think it's the reasons we talked about, and the reason I've been talking about all offseason is if you have a quarterback that can hit his intermediate routes, hit the deep ball once in a while, and you have a very good run game, which we believe they're going to have, and you have an O-line that can run block at an elite level and pass protect at an above average level, and you get a defense that's not going to kill you, then you have a chance to win 10 games, especially in the SEC, especially on the road.
Yeah, I think it's I think 10-2 is well within the range of outcomes. I think it's within reality. And it may not be I hate when they do this. I think I've seen our win total at eight games even.
7.5. I think it was 7.5, which a lot.
7.5. Okay. Yeah. I've seen some of both. I like it better being a half game. I hate trying to, pick 9 or 7. I'm not a fan of that, but it's a very interesting schedule. There's a lot of hype around LSU, and with that game being played where it is, until I see otherwise, I've kind of got to lean LSU beating us when they play us in Baton Rouge. I think this could very well be the year that changes. They lost. I've got everyone's draft picks over here on our schedule. They had 7 guys drafted of a team that wasn't that great. 4 offensive linemen got drafted.
Bookends, which is a big deal. Bookends.
Yeah. I mean, the top guy, Campbell, he went 4th overall, so huge loss. Yeah. They brought in some guys, transfer guys. That's fine and dandy. They're not going to be improved at offensive line, in my opinion. They also lose Braden Swinson, defensive end, Savion Jones, and then Mason Taylor, the tight end. I like Garrett Nussmeier a lot. I really do. I think he gets way too much. He gets way too much crap on the internet for he's a really good quarterback. I know he's not that athletic. He does turn the ball over, especially when he plays A&M. But he's a really good quarterback. He's got a lot of really good weapons. Their defense could be okay, but I think it's a very gettable team on the road. Notre Dame and Texas, both very, very good teams on the road. Those could be challenging. I think the 2 I have circled, getting them at home is a big deal. And that's Auburn and Florida. Both getting a lot of hype in the offseason, rightfully so. I mean, Auburn has an outstanding receiver room. If they get things figured out at quarterback with Jackson Arnold, who has some ability, just based, going off of his pedigree, like Hugh Freeze is an offensive guy. He will figure it out at some point. The receivers are ridiculous. Offensive line, pretty good. Defense, I don't really know. We'll see. But
that's the thing. I think with Auburn, I've heard different things. I haven't studied them enough, and I think they have a good defense. I think they have a good enough defense, but I've heard they have an elite defense from some people. I'm thinking, I don't know where people are getting that. That's the thing. I think defense is going to be a big part of this, and I think when you look at the 3 or the 4 teams, they all bring back a lot of veteran talent defensively. I think LSU is going to be fine. I think A&M obviously is going to be better in a lot of areas. Georgia and Texas, that's really their strengths, especially Texas with Colin Simmons and Anthony Hill. But to go on your point, it's like A&M, it's going to be about momentum, and it's going to be about getting early road wins. So if you can get that Notre Dame win, which would be massive, because what that would do to the locker room based on we can go down there where barely anybody, except for Northern Illinois, they can beat them there. But where barely anybody can beat, an historic team and historic stadium when, everything's going to be against you because you get 2 layup games versus I think UTSA is the first one, and then they play Utah State. So you do get those layup games to start, which is going to help Marcel Reed. But if you can get that win and then you go into SEC play, I think Auburn's the first game on the schedule, and you can really get on a nice road and path towards, like you said, 9 or 10 wins, because we saw that last year with them when they went 7-1 because they had developed the identity with Le'Veon Moss in the backfield. Marcel Reed was managing the game well enough. Obviously, the whole drama with Connor Wegman coming back and all that, that's gone now. So you don't have to deal with that anymore. And the defense didn't kill you until it did in the back end. So yeah, I think it makes sense, but obviously you guys can finish out what you think is really based on reality here.
Yeah, I think, the frustrating thing is this should be a season where A&M fans should, I think, have a lot of optimism because it's year 2 of Mike Elko when you're bringing back your starting quarterback, your entire offensive line, all of your starting running backs. You think what should be a improved wide receiver core. You bring back, you do lose some players on defense, but I think there's hope that with the guys you do return, with some of the portal additions, and then with some of the coaching moves that we've discussed earlier, like there's reasons to expect, I think, defensive improvement too. So like there's all kinds of talking points that you can bring up and say this team should be better than they were a year ago. This team, like you said, could easily win 10 games if things click and if things go right. But I think from the fan base perspective, I'm going to reference the now infamous Billy Lucci tweet where he talked about, first comes the commitment, then comes the championships. When it was about Jimbo and Schloss and Buzz, and I don't do that to throw Billy under the bus by any means, but I think it's just a larger sentiment.
Yeah.
This fan base is tired of
expectations.
They're tired of not living up to expectations. They're tired of being proven wrong. They're tired of being the butt of the joke. And is that fair to Mike Elko and to this football team? I don't think it really is, because they really, have not played a very significant part in a lot of what's led to that mindset. But I think from the fans' perspective, people are just, they obviously hungry for a winner, like nobody's business. But I think a lot of folks aren't going to believe it until they see it, unfortunately. And that's a crummy place to be, because it's pessimism, it's glass half empty, and no one wants to be that way. But I feel like for a lot of A&M fans, that's kind of a well-earned mindset at this point, unfortunately. But we're still sitting here in May. We've all got 3+ months to convince ourselves otherwise, and walk into week 1 thinking this is the year we're gonna go undefeated and win the Natty.
And that's the thing. Like I'm riding the fence a little bit. I feel like I'm in between a rock and a hard place because I've been fooled 32 seasons in a row.
Yeah.
Well, I guess with the exception of 2012.
2012. And 2020.
Yeah.
To a point.
Yeah. Sure. But the last 5 in a row have not been great. And those A&M teams have been plenty talented to get things done. But I really like the makeup of this football team. I like how they attack the receiver position. I think I like how they attacked, bringing in a guy to run the back end of the defense. I think with getting a guy like Tyreek Chappelle back, hopefully healthy, adding Jordan Shaw, I think and Julian Humphrey. I think Des Ricks, we're all going to have that bowl game stuck in our heads till we see it differently. But just a young kid with a ton of talent, super high upside. I think the offensive line is in a good spot. Defensive line, edge rushers were really impressive in the spring. I think D tackle is in a better spot than I probably gave it credit for a few months ago. So there's really no glaring weakness. I guess the glaring weakness is, hey, can Colin Klein get these pieces to work for his offense against these defenses, because there's some pretty solid defenses, especially with Notre Dame and Texas. Obviously, those aren't must-win games. There's probably the 2 toughest teams on your schedule. But and if you lose against Notre Dame on the road, that's not a death knell.
Yeah.
It's gonna suck, but it's not a death knell for your season. But man, like you said, you go in there and you win that game. You start 3-0 with a win over the national runner-up from a season ago. That's going to give you crazy momentum and put you in a really good spot the rest of the year.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think Colin Klein is on the chopping block, and obviously the fans' minds is that, are we finally going to see improvement? Because you were brought in to have a very complex scheme that the players can understand. So it's not a Jimbo area where these players didn't even know what he was doing. I mean, half the time they couldn't run it. But similar to what he did with Kansas State, obviously strong run game, having a quarterback that can run when needed. He has both those things. So, and you need a very quick, fast wide receiver core that is going to separate at a high level, that can give you that downfield deep pass, that ability to make big plays. And again, it's going to be, can Marcel Reed control this offense? Can he do what's asked? Because I don't think the scheme is an issue. I think, one of the reasons why fans hate Colin Klein in a way, and they base it off of last season, you got to give the guy a little bit of time, because it was his first season going from the Big 12 to the SEC. He lost his best player, who, again, Le'Veon Moss was their best player offensively at that time, and he was the bell cow. He was your identity. And when you lose that, and you have a smaller guy in Amari Daniels and no depth behind him, obviously losing Ruben Owens, who's back healthy to begin the season, I can't really blame him that much. It's very hard to just throw everything on him and go, it's your fault that they couldn't score points. It's your fault that Marcel Reed, again, Marcel Reed, and I'll be spending the entire summer talking about this, he's put in the work this summer. We see it in videos. We see it when he's working with coaches in the offseason. He's in the weight room lifting as much as I do for reps, which is pretty good, because I've been weightlifting my entire freaking life and he's already doing all that. So it's like,
humble brag.
Yeah, exactly. But he's doing all that. He's doing those type of things. He's doing the things that he has to do. He knows there's pressure on him. And I just hope that fans understand that this isn't, a situation where like he was just handed the job and he's just going to stroll with it and go, whatever. He knows that if he comes in and struggles and they go on like a 2-game losing streak, you've got Miles O'Neill, you've got Jacob Zeno right behind you, that if Mike Elko gets to a desperate point and says we need a change, he's going to make the change. We've already seen him do that. So we saw him do exactly. We saw him do it. He's not, I'll just say this, he's not hamstrung by Marcel Reed. He's not just going to keep him in there forever if he struggles. And
yeah, Jimbo, on the other hand, we're riding or dying with whoever that quarterback is.
And that's what I'm saying, right? Because we saw for the first time, and I think all of us saw against LSU, Connor Wigman sucked. He was terrible. He just didn't have it. And I love Connor Wigman. I hope he balls out at Houston, but he didn't have it that night. And we learned later he was still injured and he just didn't. He was in a bad mindset, but he made the change when needed and ended up winning that game because of it. So I trust Elko to make the tough decisions. That's why I'm bullish on him. That's why I feel, and what Robert said was accurate as hell. I mean, honestly, like, I understand a lot of the Aggie fan base not being excited. I get it, because you want to see the results and you're sick of being disappointed, because it sucks. It sucks to see these teams just lose in the worst ways. And that was just a year after the baseball team lost by a run in the national championship game. And it all just kind of came to head when, obviously, we've been talking about the entire show with baseball and softball. So it is hard to go into the summer, be super excited. I know someone will get back on the train of like when we see more of these workout videos and the team really getting into fall practice. And then when the season starts. But I think that when you go in and you play these first 2 games, you want to see A&M score a ton of points. You want to see this offense look in sync. You want to see Marcel Reed take deep shots, connect with his receivers. We want to see guys like Casey Concepcion look like that star number 1. And you want to see a healthy Le'Veon Moss. And finally, you want to see Ruben Owens, who I had Carter Carrolls on the show about a month ago, and we were talking about that. He basically said, it was during spring practice, this is his last shot to prove that he's that 5-star talent. But what's his role? Because we know what Amari Daniels can do. We obviously know what Moss can do. We know that Moss is completely healthy and that he's ready to get back to form. But what is Owens going to do for this offense? Is it going to be more of a is it going to be like a two-back set situation? Is he going to be more of a receiver? We don't know. But they've got the dudes to get it done. That's why I'm positive on him. It's not just because I cover A&M and I'm trying to make them feel good. If they had a bad roster, I would talk about it. I mean, but they, like you said, well, they don't have a ton of holes, and the roster is, or the schedule is tough. But look, this is year 2 for Mike Elko. This is year 2 for Colin Klein. There's a lot of pressure. You know, we saw the changes he made with Bateman. Obviously, Elko's going to take a bigger role in defensive play calling, bringing Hemphill in. He's doing what he has to do because he knows there's pressure on him. And, you know, we hope that, you know, pressure creates diamonds, as we know. So hopefully that's the case.
Yeah, you know, and if they had failed to address the receiver position, you know, this in the offseason, I'd sit here and say, you know what, guys, ain't gonna be much better because you know, and there's some young guys like, you know, I'm a big believer in Isaiah Williams and Ashton Bethel Roman, who I think are gonna have great seasons. But going and getting a guy like Concepcion, getting a guy like Mario Craver, that room as a whole now has a very, very high ceiling. We'll see about Jerome Miles. Saw he was running track the other day.
He's running track, and he ran a very impressive.
I think a 10.7.
10.7, yeah. And I mean that. So, and if you can, I know this from guys who have had knee issues and stuff like that. If you can run like that, you're going to be fine during the 25 season. Like, so yeah. He's another guy who can take the top off the defense, like you said.
Yeah, I was bummed that he was the one guy from the whole class that wasn't here in the spring, but obviously rehab seems to be going very well for him. Yeah. I will say, and then we can get out of here. You guys may have talked about this after the spring game. I hate drafting the teams for the spring game. I think it sucks. It's a stupid idea. I love drafting. You know, I'll draft anything with you, but I hate putting this in a format for the fans of not seeing what we really not seeing what we have. Like Marcel Reed was under pressure the second he got the football every single snap. And you see people make these big judgments and proclamations like, oh my gosh, Reed sucks. Like he can't throw. I mean, and you know, I'll say this and not, you know, to make to say these are the same player or either one is good or bad. But I watched Notre Dame spring game because I've seen clips of CJ Carr just you know, dropping some dimes, stuff like that. Yeah. And wouldn't you know it, he's standing in a clean pocket. He gets pressured one time, the ball goes in the dirt. So I'm just saying, you know, anyone can look good when things are going good around you, but you know, and Marcel's a guy who can make things happen with his legs and obviously extend plays. So I think with the, you know, actual starting O-line, I think center, sneaky good upgrade, getting Naboo back over Coley. And obviously having a healthy Chase Pasantis for a whole season would go a long way. But yeah, just overall very bullish on the team, but just kind of keeping it to myself for the most part and not getting out over my skis. So
it's interesting. It's interesting coverage, and it's kind of funny because, you know, in the A&M journalism aspect, and obviously you guys know that it's, you know, we all kind of have similar tones sometimes. We all kind of cover the team. You guys do it a little more humorous and better, in my opinion, but it's not as boring. But it's going to be very interesting come summer when obviously all the recruiting focus and stuff like that comes, and we finally get closer and closer, and it gets real now, and you really start evaluating everything. And I think we've laid it out. And I think two of the players you mentioned, Isaiah Williams and Ashton Bethel Roman, Ken Torres, who's been on the show last couple times, kind of a rising recruiting guy. He was at the game, and we were talking about that. And I was like, well, who really stood out? And like you just said, Will, obviously when you do pick the teams, it's like the O-line is just so bad. And I felt bad for Reed because he's just trying to have one clean pocket. But even without, he made some great throws, and he found Casey Concepcion like 3 or 4 times. And I remember I was asking about that. He said, he looks like the number one option, right? He said, yeah. He said, Casey, he was getting open every time against Will Lee and some of the better corners, and he's just finding those gaps, and that's going to make Reed's job so much easier because other guys are going to get open. The biggest thing, like with Mario Craver, he already shown he can beat guys deep. Like that's what his skill set is. Mike Elko was talking about how he killed us against Mississippi State, and he's a young talent, so he's got a ways to go. But Isaiah Williams and Ashton Bethel Roman, I was just going to say they're excellent route runners. You didn't have that last year. You had guys that did not run crisp routes, and that's one of the reasons they couldn't separate. So now you have that, and you have options. That's the biggest change in my opinion.
Well, they showed it in that game that they can make plays while the ball's in the air and help the quarterback out when the ball's not perfect. I feel like we haven't really had that since Josh Reynolds and Christian Kirk. I mean,
Yeah.
these are real deal receivers who can, even if Reed doesn't put the ball, just perfectly, like a couple of these guys, like you just get it close to them and they can go up and make a play for you.
Yeah. Playmakers. What a thought.
I would love to see it. It's been a long time.
No, I mean, honestly, like those first 2 games, I just want to see them score a lot and score in a variety of ways, and that's what's really going to pump people up. Like, okay, maybe there is some change, because if you're beating Utah State 20-14, there's going to be problems, right? There's going to be big problems, and you're going to go to Notre Dame, and I think a lot of fan base are going to be like, okay, I don't know about this. You beat the crap out of those 2 teams. You go with a little momentum. You actually look like the team we are going to be talking about relentlessly. I think it's going to start to change a little bit. I just think that's my last point. I'll let you guys finish. But I agree that I don't think it's fair for Mike Elko. I don't think he cares. I think he's got a job to do. Fans are going to say what they want. But I do believe that he understands how important it is to improve and finally win 9 games, get a playoff berth, break that curse, and get A&M on the right track, because earning a playoff berth this season would be huge for this program, and it would act as not just recruiting momentum, but it would be actual progress, because we haven't made actual progress. Going 7-1, that's not progress. That's just nice, right? It's nice to go back and look at that, and then it all went downhill. But doing that is going to be a huge catapult into year 3, where obviously recruiting is already great. He's already shown he can get players in the transfer portal. He's already checked enough boxes. It's just finally doing it on the field, getting it done in year 2. Because I think year 2 for any coach, outside of Sarkisian, I think he was terrible in year 2. And then what was it, like year 3 or 4 when it turned around? So Elko's going to get a lot of criticism where Sarkisian didn't get as much, but we know why that is.
But yeah, I think the good news, just from the fan perspective, is I think you don't have an apathetic fan base. I think you have an angry fan base.
Yeah.
Bingo.
And while that's not necessarily ideal, I think it's also one that can turn around very, very quickly. Like you said, I think you win that Notre Dame game, and then say you close out September by beating Auburn. I think you get a whole lot of people back on the train really, really quickly. And it's like, so to the point of, from Mike Elko's perspective, I agree that it doesn't matter, because his job is to win games no matter what the fans think. But even more importantly, if he does do his job, the fan perception takes care of itself.
Yeah, I think the last part I'll add onto that, because that gave me a good thought. I don't think any of us are have our names on any buildings. Like, we're not any any big money donors to the program. But you saw, like, in a year we didn't make the playoff or make win a championship with the Johnny Manziel year. And an obscene amount of money just flowed into the program. Like Robert said, we're not apathetic. We're angry because we know what things can be here and what the potential is. And you go out and show you're going in the right direction, and shoot, if you make the playoff, in year 2, and do some damage that way, I think even with the outstanding financial obligations that we currently have, I think you see a lot of support pour into the program in a big way. So obviously we'd all love to see it. I'm bullish, but yeah, I'm going to believe it when I see it.
Yeah, realistic. That's really what it is now.
The good news is,
you're right.
If we have a great season this year, then we can just all say that Learfield Sports was the problem the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just,
play fly.
Yeah. Because, look, Mike Elko isn't going anywhere. I'm not having that conversation. We can talk about Early. We can talk about everybody else. It's just, you guys pretty nailed it. You pretty much nailed it. It's just a weird time to be an Aggie fan, to be an alumni, to cover this team. But again, there's hope ahead. And look, everybody, if you love football, you're going to watch the season. That's how I see it. You're going to watch the season no matter what. You can be as angry as possible, but you're going to get excited at the end of August when they finally kick off in Kyle Field. It's going to happen. And it's like, look, our job here is just tell you what's going on, sometimes give opinion, but I just don't ever get that low because I've seen other programs have these similar type of just low points in their athletic programs. Not like this recently. It's just been pretty crazy. But look, they usually get out of it. It doesn't have to, but the biggest thing is the financial part of it is not a problem. That's why the anger persists, right? Because they know we can be much better than we are. It's not because we're lagging in those areas. So, all right, guys, that was a great discussion. Make sure to obviously like and subscribe. This was episode 7. We were not here last week. I was not feeling well. Will and Robert will be back on the show every once in a while. Obviously, this is in our permanent lineup. This is what we like to do, kind of shake it up. But where can the folks follow you guys, obviously, if they aren't already?
At Will Stone CFB on Twitter, also known as X.
And for me, also on X, you can find me at RCB05.
All right, I'm at Cameron Honesty. That's pretty easy. And obviously lead writer at Aggies Wire, as you guys know. So we'll be covering everything A&M for the next, forever, as long as I'm there. So not fun times, I would say, but it's interesting times. And that, at least I have a job. That's all that matters. That's how I look at it.
It's still
all right,
something
guys.
to talk about that.
Yeah, exactly. All right, guys. Have a good night.
All right. Appreciate it, y'all.